and particularly you can ask questions in the chat, and we monitor the chat and use it in the Q&A. So we'll come back to you if you already ask a question there. So do that. As Pedro mentioned, this is the third in this year's series of webinars focusing on the new architecture of EU policies and funds post-2027, what place for local development. The first two were organized by Ursula Budzic-Tabor, who is also my deputy chair, or our deputy chair rather. And Serafin has the special honor of having been a speaker in all three of these. But in the first, we also had Stefan, who I noticed is in the audience, Ursula herself. And in the second, we had Radim Cizen from the Regional Development Ministry in Czechia. I mentioned Serafin. We also had Ursula. Piotr Sudloka from ILAD, and Joachim Olivero from, I can't even read my writing, so I'll ignore that. And in each one, we've basically asked the question about what's going to happen in this new outline of the MFF and how can we perhaps influence it. The biggest concern that most people are commenting upon is that it's a major shift in the orientation of the EU funding programs. And in terms of the programs that finance local development, it moves us much towards what I would call a renationalization of these funds, which will take away the regional dimension to a large degree, and risks also diminishing further the involvement of the European Commission in the negotiations of these programs. And if I look back to my own heyday, back in the 1990s, when I was in DG Regio, helping to negotiate cohesion policy programs across, at the time, I don't know how many member states we had, not nearly as many as now. The Commission played a major role, and we can see over the period of now 30 years since then, that the Commission has had to step back and step back and step back. And each time that step back happens, the quality of the programs, it's difficult to say have improved. I would argue that they have declined. For us involved in local development, this is a particular worry. Just a quick note before I hand back to Pedro. At LDnet, we've adopted a slightly new structure this year with the new board. We've shifted the home of the organization from France, where we had been registered since our start in 2010, I think. We've shifted to, maybe 2012, we've shifted to Estonia because of the high level of digital facility that Estonia offers an organization like ours. And that was completed in the middle of this year. And we now have a bank account. We have a new board. And with the new board, we adopted a new devolved structure. So we now have 4 working groups, one of which is this one, focusing on the Multiannual Financial Framework. We also have one focusing on urban CLLD. We have a communications group, and we have a new ideas group. And if you as a member, or we encourage you to join if you're not already a member, it is free. But if you want to participate in any of these groups, we're also open to co-opting new people onto them. We'll be reporting on the work of the groups in newsletters and other activities that we post on the website. I'll hand back to Pedro. We look forward to a vital and interesting discussion. And particularly if you've got questions, please post them in the chat, as I already mentioned, and I'll hand back to Pedro. Thanks, Pedro.
Yes, thank you, Peter, for this introduction. And yes, we wanted to know now from those who are working very closely, let's say, in Brussels, on, let's say, accompanying the developments for the new MFF, to know what they expect and what they think about it, let's say, regarding local development. So we have, if we look at the list of speakers now, we have Serafin Pasos Vidal from ADL, who you probably already know if you have attended the other the previous webinars. He's, let's say, an expert on local development and on rural development, and he has a large, let's say, experience in working on regional level and advising the regional level and the commission. And I remember myself having worked with him many years ago in Brussels. And Serafin is really accompanying this whole process, let's say, very close, especially the territorial development part in the new MFF framework. So he will give us an overview on that. And then we have a participant, a speaker from a national ministry, which I think is very brave at this stage, let's say, of the process, where negotiations with the council are just starting. And Aleksandra Sztetyło-Buczewska from the funds ministry in Poland, who's also attending working groups meeting of the council in Brussels. She will always also give her, let's say, our first impressions from a member state level, from a member state, of course, like Poland, that has many regions, and the regions are also used, let's say, to plan the things a little bit on their own. And then we have Ursula, our vice chair of the board in LDnet. She also works at ADL, and Ursula is, of course, someone who has worked for so many years with local development approaches, with LEADER in Poland, where she started, let's say, she was one of the first. Then lately for many years in the farmer support unit for the fisheries lag, and now she's with the Rural Pact Support Office, and she has led some initiatives, let's say, also in this frame to get to know a little bit more and to prepare, let's say, the Rural Pact actors better for the new MFF. We will then go again to Serafin and his thoughts, let's say, and his the perspectives that he's expecting. And then at the end, we will have the opportunity for discussion and Q&A. And without further ado, in that case, I would like then to hand over to Serafin, who should be able to share his presentation. Welcome, Serafin.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that it's a bit of a record, third participation in a row. Much appreciated. It's good to be in great company with people I know for many years. So I was asked to do a presentation, but then we decided that would be good that I set the scene, because before last time we met, we discussed the likely direction of travel, and that was before the 16th. Some people would say infamous 16th of July day, with the day the Europe changed, or at least the local development changed. Let's see how far. And then we'll provide in the debate like a bit for more suggestions based on a number of recommendations we are developing and talking with institutions. I mean, actually today, speaking from the Committee of the Regions and the ECOSOC, where we are discussing the MFF and what can be done to improve it on several things that will improve local and place-based sensitive ideas. So that's part of the discussion. But let me do first a bit of a short introduction where we are, because I appreciate that many people I see is well versed on this, but others not necessarily so. So let's start with the famous picture that many of you will have seen, which is presented by Mrs. von der Leyen on that famous press conference on the 16th. The new EU budget is being reshaped from 52 to 16 programs. The aim is to be simple for beneficiaries, results-oriented and more agile. In essence, it's divided between two big strands. The red one, which is the National Regional Partnership Plans, which is a bit like a super-sized version of the CAP strategic plans that many of you know about, the Common Agricultural Policy Strategic Plans, and one plan for a member state. We'll come back in a moment. And the other big bit is the European Competitiveness Fund, which we are less the people around this table are going to be less involved with, but it's an important part of the picture. And then there's a few other strands that will be invested. The size of the budget is bigger because they're going to increase the number of resources, including paying European taxes, so to speak, if there's ever an agreement with that. And that's the problem. A lot of the what I'm going to say depends on whether they're going to be so-called European taxes. Otherwise, the whole calculation will change. But one of the reasons we're going to discuss, and we're discussing at the moment about how the programs will work, but not necessarily about much of the envelopes. And the reason why is that the Commission has given to each member state in their national and regional partnership plans roughly a bit less what they are getting now. Of course, if you count for inflation, it's much less than what they were given in 2021. But still, it's a rather relatively stable amount of money overall across the whole envelope received by the member state in this national regional partnership plans. Von der Leyen has been, I think, it has to be credited to von der Leyen to challenge some assumptions. There's been a proliferation of schemes, and I think it's not a bad thing to rethink the purpose of many instruments. Whether that the right approach is a separate question. So we could start with this before we get to the national plans, which is of course the biggest interest for most people around the table. Let's dwell a bit into the competitiveness fund, which is this 25% of the budget, which merge a lot of funds that are currently already directly managed by the Commission. A good way of saying that is that you can understand that's like a bit of a big pocket of money that the Commission can actually use quickly if there's new war or new crisis without having to negotiate much with the Parliament or with the member states. And that is because Mrs. von der Leyen, I was present when she presented this, said that, I started my mandate a month before COVID. And I realized that to respond at the European level, I only have a 4% margin in my budget of the EU budget, the Commission budget, to do anything about it. And that's why we have to negotiate all these different packages. So to go about without that will be this European Competitive Fund is going to be, of course, to serve many issues, decarbonization, digital health, and so on, defense and space, which is a new priority, and Horizon Europe. But in reality, it's a big pot that the Commission will have much more freedom to use. Of course, member states and the European Parliament will be concerned about this degree of liberty that the Commission has reserved for itself. I'm obviously exaggerated here, but just to try to convey the idea. One important thing for some of you that are researchers is that in Horizon Europe, after a lot of lobby from the universities, was going to be, or is nominally separate from the competitiveness fund. However, if you look at the fine print, you will see that, if need be, there could be also flexibilities applied to Horizon Europe to adapt to whatever new crisis of this eternal public crisis we are seen to be suffering. If we move to the new national and regional partnership plans, I think we're going to start with this actually before getting to CAP, because otherwise we overstep myself. The national regional partnership plans, as you say, merges the cohesion policy, regional development fund, social fund, the cohesion fund, those countries have it, the common agricultural policy, farm subsidies, and and as well the European Fisheries Fund. So in a way, for those of you who know the EU budget or the EU policies, it's like adapting the EU recovery program, the recovery and stabilization facility, with what we have now, these CAP strategic plans that cover all of rural development and agricultural subsidies, and lumping together the cohesion policy and other funds. That is a bold move. It has been attempted before, but never to this level of ambition, because it means all policies having a shared management with the member states, or actually managed by the member state, are lumped into a single plan. And that creates, I think, opportunities for avoid double funding, lack of coherent, ministries that don't talk to each other, regions that don't talk with the governments, departments that within the same municipality don't talk with each other because different funds. I think it's not a bad thing to have, but the problem is that this could be a massive experiment that can fail because it's such a big shift in a very short period. And of course, we have concerns because the territorial dimension of the programs are going to be overlooked. At the same time, there's a link with this structural reforms and milestone-based payments. This is something that we have since COVID times with the EU recovery program. And the European Court of Auditors said that, and many people say, well, it's a rather bit of a gamble to put so much money dispersed in that way. It can work in theory, but in practice, it's a bit more difficult. Then there's like a lot of things that we like a lot in this virtual meeting, like the partnership principle or the new right to stay concept, but it's rather performative. It's enunciated rather than used. If we go to the cap, which is many of you are a bit very interested, we have a radical restructuring of the policies. As I say, one plan for a member state that includes cap. Pillar 1, what is now Pillar 1 farm support, is earmark, but everything else, and then poorer regions more or less get the same money than at the moment, like they also have 75% below the EU average. But everything else is up for grabs. The leader is mentioned, but only mentioned. There's no specific allocation of money, and that is an issue. The rules are very general. I mean, the regulations used to run for hundreds of pages, which is not a good thing. But having so much money allocated into a 20-page document, which is more or less what we have now, it is something that has been raised concerns. And latest that you finished this introduction. So this is a bold move. I don't think it's a completely unwelcome move in theory, but it's such a radical proposal compared to any of the scenarios that we were looking at over the last few years. Many of us have reading extensively about that MEPs, the Committee of the Regions, the European Social Committee, all the organizations were opposed to that. We even had the MEPs of the main traditional groups sending a letter threatening to veto the whole process, which is unprecedented. The Council, of course, is much more happy about that because that gives much more leeway to the member states to decide with very little European Union constraints what to do with the European money. So the Commission President sent a conciliatory letter. It's not a revised proposal. It's a letter to the co-legislator, Council of Ministers, then its presidents in this case, and the key MEPs, suggesting possible changes that can be introduced in the next year and a half of negotiations. A 10% EU rural earmark, which we'll discuss in a moment what it means. A partnership principle check, i.e. that the Commission will verify if local and regional authorities, urban and rural stakeholders, social actors, and universities have been actually involved in the preparation, design, and implementation evaluation of these new national regional partnership plans. The regional mention originally was supposed to be national partnership plans, but of course, the notion of regional were added to the original proposal, and now the new language suggested by the Commission, again, is not a formal proposal, it's just suggestions that they are being discussed separately in the Parliament and in the European Council, will introduce additional safeguards to prevent that national governments go over the powers established by their constitutions for the regions or even local authorities. It's not just regions we're talking about here. There's also a safeguard of regional dialogue with regions. It's the first time that this is actually mentioned in EU legislation this way, other than the Committee of the Regions and a few other things, but that's rather big change politically. The Council has already said, well, we can work with that proposal. And the Committee of the Regions, European Social Committee, MEPs reluctantly have now started to work. It has been a bit of a phony work over the last 3 months. And now suddenly, after this letter, not that everybody's happy about it, but has a base for movement, a movement we are having and big speed as we speak. I'll leave it there because I'm sure the other colleagues will comment and I'll come with some suggestions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serafin, for this really, really good introduction. I think, well, maybe some of you who are not so closely working with the topic have maybe a few questions you can ask them in the chat, some clarification questions. And before I hand over to Alexandra, I would like to say, well, these latest developments, they look already like some first attempts of repairing some things from the proposal. And let's see what, for example, some civil servant from a member state like Alexandra from ministry that is, let's say, working with all funds anyway, coordinating the funds, that's the Polish system, has to tell us at this stage. Thank you very much. Alexandra, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Alexandra Sztetuło-Budzewska, but please call me Alexandra. And because my name is very long, I thank you very much for having me here. And I think I participated in the first meeting of LDnet, but it was a few months ago at least. So I hope that you find interesting what I'm going to present to you. Because I work in the ministry which deals with cohesion policy funds. And I think it's a bit different perspective than when you look at funds from the Ministry of Agriculture or CAP perspective. First of all, I'm a civil servant, so I would like to make such a small announcement that these views are just my opinions, and by no way this is not either an official position of Poland on the new Commission proposal or official position of my ministry on this proposal. But I wanted to tell you what I think, or my colleagues in my department think, when we look at the upcoming documents. I saw also in the list a few of Polish names. So if my colleagues want to intervene or have something to add, I hope they will be able to help. This is maybe I can have another slide. Thank you very much. I work for the institution which is playing a role of coordinating institution for partnership agreement. And we have in our, let's say, basket national programs. And also we oversee or coordinate regional programs. In Poland, we have 16 regions called voivodeships. And, oh, can I have another, slide? Because I have already started to talk about the next one. Yes, so I work in the Ministry of Funds, let's call it in a simple way, which is coordinating national programs and 16 regional programs. And in Poland, in 1998, we had a big reform, which created 16 voivodeships, 16 regions, which were given certain independence in creating regional policy. And one of the fields where the regional authorities can operate, can be independent, is regional programs using cohesion policy funds. And it started back in 2007 with in the first perspective when Poland could use in full, which means that we have a long experience of these institutions at the regional level being independent and shaping their own policy. Our ministry can only coordinate, and our regions have direct access to the European Commission. They negotiate their own programs, etc., etc. And but that was in the field of the cohesion policy. As far as agriculture policy, common agriculture policy is concerned, this is the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, which is playing the role of the managing institution. And it also has a role for regions, but regions are only the kind of intermediate bodies, and they are really, they get instructions, regulations, and guidance directly from the Ministry of Agriculture. So when we started to cooperate in the field of CLLDs, it turned out that we have a lot of discussions that we have to really start to work very closely with the Ministry of Agriculture. And maybe it depends on the culture of the country, But in our country, I think that the others would agree that this is the ministries are silos. I mean, they are separate. They're like separate containers with their own goals and missions, etc., etc. And we find it, or maybe I should use a past tense. We found it very difficult at the beginning to come into common solutions or agreement how to help local action groups to operate several funds from two different, let's say, from two different kingdoms. Right? Under cohesion policy, regional authorities were free to choose the set of territorial and local tools. I apologize for all abbreviations I have, but I will be saying them in full in extenso, meaning that the integrated territorial investment it was the only compulsory tool which had to be used in capitals of the regions. That was compulsory that these regions created such ITIs. Otherwise, they could, for example, decide to have CLDs in their programs or not to have. And in years 2014, 2020, there were only two voivodeships which have chosen to have and to support local action groups. Of course, with regard to the common agriculture policy, our whole country is covered by local action groups, and they were using just the agriculture fund. So it has changed in the current period, and we are as a country are kind of affluent when it comes to regional instruments. Can I please have another slide, please? Okay, yes. So I can say that there's a competition among local and territorial and local strategies. Since every region could decide what to do and how to go about original tools, let's say territorial tools. We have currently, in current perspective, we have 95 integrated territorial instruments in functional areas. So as you see, some regions are just covered and with territorial instruments, and very often these instruments overlap. So as you see on the map to your left, I understand, there are some ITIs, so there are some other territorial tools, which are mostly regeneration of disadvantaged areas. We call it revitalization sometimes. And this kind of programs, this kind of tools are implemented only in one municipality. They do not cover more than one. Otherwise, territorial tools cover more than one administrative unit. But as you see, sometimes we have ITI and ATT, and sometimes two ATTs in the same region, and sometimes more than 3 instruments. And obviously, these instruments have a bit similar philosophy as CLDs, meaning that they need participation, and we put a lot of effort into invigorating local communities to take part in them. So over the years, now we have in every of these instruments a group of people which is involved, and a group of local society which is functioning and really having its input for the well-being of and for to implement well this kind of instrument. On top of that, we have local action groups, and in Poland we have almost 300 local action groups, out of which there are only a little over 100 supported only by the Rural Fund. And we have 180, over 180 multi-fund EFRDs, local action groups, where we have a mixture of 2 or 3 funds. You can see on the map on the right, to your right, what kind of mixture it is and how regions selected, what kind of funds they have selected, and how they support the local action groups. That's why I'm saying that there's a certain competition among territorial and local strategies, and I do agree that in some way, I believe that in one way we should have some trust in member states that they would allocate appropriate amount of money to support these instruments. On the other hand, there's always the discussion who will have more power and who would be able to secure for given type of instrument more financial resources under new perspective. Can I have please another slide? So Poland has already come with its official first position on the new regulation, on the package of regulations, and first of all, we also think that it was a brave decision on behalf of the Commission to have one fund to support synergies of intervention, and we think that it could increase efficiency in implementation, at least in theory. But as we know, that practice can be very different, and we learn it, I mean, day by day, because we have to cooperate in the field of local action groups, and we know how it is difficult to put together ERDF and ESF Plus, not speaking about the agriculture funds. So when we have 3 of them, sometimes we cannot come to the agreement, even with a very simple things, like just to give you one example, for example, place of living, inhabitants. In one, we have a simple rule that strategy for CLDs is aiming at inhabitants, and in the strategic plan for agricultural policy, for common agriculture policy, inhabitant is a person just registered with a registered place of dwelling in certain municipality. In cohesion policy, so ESF Plus and ERDF, definition is such that is certain that this is the place. Inhabitant is a person who actually lives there, and it doesn't have to have any kind of paper to prove it. So it may come to the so it may happen that the same person can be a beneficiary under cohesion policy programs, but it cannot be a beneficiary under strategic plan for CAP because it doesn't hold the paper, or separate, or differently, or opposite. If it holds a paper, it may not get just the paper, but it doesn't live in reality in the given municipality. It can be granted under CAP some resources, some funding, but it cannot be granted resources under cohesion policy. So all these small things are, just to show that it's not really very easy to come to the agreement, even in small matters. We also think that it's, and I know that the Ministry of Agriculture would not agree with our opinion. We believe that no capping, so meaning no prescribed quota for given instruments for certain areas, gives us more flexibility to decide in our country how to go about certain problems. But I know that the Ministry of Agriculture is of a different opinion, and we, in our Polish position, we wanted to, I think it was written that we would welcome to have a separate plan or separate program for agriculture, and that we expect some capping for agriculture as well. I have already mentioned what are the advantages of the new act, that we are a bit afraid that we can lose the experience of decentralized policy implementation in Poland, that we are not really, maybe we don't know enough, but I think that it's unclear, that the system of combining various funds, for us it's a bit unclear. We are a bit afraid of clogging of the system, because now I understand the Commission has on much fewer programs, but all of these programs with the idea that the monitoring committees will be approving local strategies. And in Polish case, it's I think it may be about 1,000 of local strategies, right? In the end. So when we have 1,000 of local strategies and local monitoring committees have to approve them, I think it can be really difficult in practical way to do it. And we are really feel sorry that there are no specific objectives dedicated to territorial instruments. Like now we have this specific objectives concerning Europe closer to citizens, and there used to be some specific goals, also specific in the previous perspective, 2014-2020. Can I have another slide, please? Okay. So we yes. We also think that we need a bit more focus on stress in the new regulation, that if LEADER is a type of CLD instrument that is written and it is supported by the same total fund, rules have to be really harmonized, and should be no really separate special provisions requirements, because otherwise we will end up in the situation which is similar to the current situation. Harmonization will be more difficult. We see that some competences of local action groups are defined, but at the same time, managing authorities' competences are not that clearly defined as they are in the current perspective. And we still are thinking that there is no involvement of ESF Plus in territorial instruments. And this is the part which local groups really need, and they could use it very well. And we believe that in a way, ESF Plus is kind of blind to territorial instruments. They always say that, yes, we have our own goals, and as long as a territorial instrument can support our goals, it's okay. And we view it differently. We believe that ESF Plus can be a great tool to invigorate local communities. And ESF type interventions are very important, and currently it's about 27% of intervention put into LACs in ESF Plus, and local action groups are learning how to use it, and I think it could be a great development for the future if we could have more of it in the next years. Can I have another? Yes, and we're a bit disappointed that in a way that the new regulation kind of repeated same wording from the current regulation, and this current regulation gave us a lot of issues to discuss, and the issues were our interpretation. We're not sure about how to interpret certain things. So we would be most happy to see somehow these issues being kind of explained or maybe written a different way. First of all, there's still not, we are not really sure how to overcome this this problem that the strategies have to be bottom up. And on the other hand, we have a predefined areas of interventions and other numerous requirements when really you cannot address needs of the local community. We are not sure how to make that to ensure that local action groups have enough money for own contribution. Because in cohesion policy, they have to have own contributions when they make their own projects and their own interventions. We would like to see more cascading projects in LAGs, because we really believe that the cascading projects are kind of empowerment for local action groups. We would like them to have more responsibility over not only to select beneficiaries, but really to be a beneficiary and to select grants and kind of be responsive for implementing the entire strategy. So the cascading project is not when the managing authority signs contract with the beneficiary, but it's a local action group which signs such a contract. We have problem with defining interest groups, and they are still there in the new regulation. And oh yes, I will speak in a minute about the cascading project. And we have many problems with defining or interpreting what it means in practice that no single interest groups controls the decision making, because eventually decision has to be make some decisions. So how you come to the decision in the decision process to some conclusion. And we find it very difficult for our local action groups that they have to observe all mainstream rules, which are sometimes very harsh for them in a small community, in a small organization. For example, I don't even know. For example, especially for example with indicators, and it's a special difficulty in ESF plus. Cascading projects. To explain that this is currently the classical approach to local action groups is such that local action groups has a process of selecting operations, and when the operation is selected, the contract, the finance contract or grant contract is signed between managing authority and beneficiary. In cascading project, it's a managing authority which signs a contract with the local action group, and it's kind of a global grant, and says, well, this is the money and you can implement this part of your strategy. And then the local action group selects operations and signs contracts. And then when everything is done, then it goes back to the managing authority and says, here, this is the operation which I implemented. So this is it's very popular in Poland, especially with ESF plus. And mainstream rules are that, for example, with regard to indicators are such that, for example, you have to reach a certain level, for example, of people with disabilities in your project, right? The certain quotas. And it may be just difficult for a small organization, in a small community, to achieve this kind of results. And we had a very difficult time discussing it with our colleagues from ESF part, that somehow that it will be maybe possible to make it not that for example, to make these thresholds, for example, lower, or not to use this kind of requirements towards lags. Okay. So, and the final slide, if I may go to the last one. Despite of all these issues, we in Poland, we have a very strong interest in the continued support for CLLDs in the next period. And we are really determined to harmonize approach and make it easier for local action groups to implement strategies. We are striving to increase LAC's empowerment. And again, sorry for this cascading operations, but we would like to have more powers in signing contracts, and then and signing contracts with final beneficiaries. We would like to uphold very strong and good and close cooperation with the Ministry of between our ministry and Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. And we have a group, which is a subcommittee under Committee for Partnership Agreement, where we have all at the national level, when we have regional regional authorities, where we have ministries, where we have also representative of local action groups from all regions. And we would like very much to uphold it and to have discussions how to solve common problems. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Alexandra. I think for the, let's say, second part of your presentation, you really emphasized already on the, let's say, local development perspective, CLLD and leader, and then where the comments and questions came into the chat already. But I think we will leave some of those discussions on the nitty-gritty to the end, to the discussion, because we wanted to focus a little bit more, let's say, on the current developments and what is, let's say, still in the current, let's say, negotiations and discussions. But we saw also from your side that, let's say, generally a little bit in line with what Serafin said, it is good to have a new approach. The question is how and to which extent this can go. And we are really, really far away in many member states, especially those with regions, let's say with powerful regions, on how this will look like in the end. But maybe Ursula, because she has worked a lot on the already with the Rural Pact, let's say, in some discussions. There was recently an event, has already some, let's say, ideas and some questions which can be raised to this. Ursula, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Petro, and I hope you can see my presentation. I will try to summarize some of the key points of the discussion with stakeholders, or positions already taken by stakeholders towards the Commission's proposals that were, I would say, we have already invited, as Peter reminded us at the beginning, we have invited ELARD, for example, to share their views. We have invited Radim Sershen, who was actually representing also the Rural Pact Coordination Group. So there are a lot of bodies that have already expressed concerns, in addition to the ones that Serafin mentioned, like, of course, the European Parliament and the Committee of the Regions and the European Economic and Social Committee. But from the perspective of local development, I have identified, let's say, 4 groups of issues, of the questions that stakeholders are let's say, raising or that are worried about. The first issue is the centralization of decision making, the centralization at national level, and that there's a risk of losing national, regional, and local dimension. The second risk or issue is this, has been already mentioned as well, this flexibility at member states level, so too much left to member states, which could potentially increase inequalities between member states and between different, let's say, territories across the EU. The fact that certain types of territories have a specificity and that they should be treated differently, they should have an identity and maybe earmarked funding. Otherwise, there is a competition. There's a risk of that the stronger players will actually monopolize the funding, like especially rural areas tends to fall into like the gap between, on the one hand, the farmers, who are very strong lobby and who tend to secure their funding. On the other hand, the urban interests and the areas, let's say, strongly populated areas, and rural areas which are in the middle, unless they have their interests safeguarded in the funding, they will lose with the competition. And finally, this issue of area-based tools, so specifically from this territorial perspective, the issue of leader CLLD, but also smart villages, which are considered a recognized success at the EU level, but at the same time, they have not been given the right place in the new legislation. These are the claims of stakeholders, and this is what we hear when we talk to people in NGOs, in organizations, but also local authorities. So let me just very quickly mention the issues with each of those points. So that the centralization has been presented one program, and in name it has national and regional. In practice, we don't know, but it can be considered a step back, or as Alexandra was saying, we're losing actually the capacity that we're building at the regional level to manage, to program and manage their own funding. And the important thing is that key decisions are not just about how much money goes to whom, but it's also the eligibility conditions, the performance indicators, and these, with a single program per member state, there is a risk that this will be very, very centrally decided. So even if stakeholders will have a role to play, maybe in some kind of consultations of who should get funding, the actual nitty-gritty, implementation rules will be very much centrally decided without stakeholders having enough say on that. There is also the risk of breaking the existing linkages in regional, local level. This tissue of relationships and let's say getting to know each other. For example, between the LAGs and the regional authorities, there has already been a learning process, and this will now be all lost. And then finally, what Serafin also mentioned as the partnership principle. Yes, the Commission is very much saying, yes, this partnership principle is still mandatory as in the past, and we all know how it was in the past, and it was not, it very much depends on the member state, but in some member states, the partnership principle is limited to putting up some documents on the website and saying we are having citizen consultations. That is not like a partnership that civil society actors and local actors are talking about. So that how to make sure that this time round we actually implement the partnership principle in the right way, how to enforce this, how to monitor that this is actually being enforced, that the member states are doing following this principle. There are a lot of questions raised about that. Now, this question of flexibility of member state level, which is, of course, yes, many stakeholders wanted it. It is considered a good thing. Well, but maybe you can have too much of a good thing. So I know I have heard a lot of people who said, I have been in favor of flexibility, but now I find there's too much of it. And I want the Commission to take back some of its powers And we hear a lot about the common European values, which, if we have too much to be decided at the national level, we are sort of losing those common European values because we are very much following the priorities of every member state. That is also losing the European integrity or cohesion. There's also the concern that some national administrations, may not have the capacity to design and implement those huge programs in a forward-looking, strategic way, or that there may be the cooperation culture, as Alexandra mentioned, the cooperation culture between the different institutions, the different ministries, different sectors, different levels, let's say, of administration. In some member states, this is working well. In other member states, not necessarily, and that raises a lot of concern from local stakeholders, especially. And overall, we can end up with a situation where the imbalances between member states that are well organized and that are spending the EU money well, and those member states that are not maybe doing a very good job, these imbalances can increase. So if this we can call the abdication of the Commission, trying to let's say to work towards these balances by different small rules, that if this disappears, if this attention from the EU level disappears, we risk having too many let's say inequalities growing in between member states and territories. Now, the certain types of territories I already mentioned, rural areas, but there's also concerns about mountainous areas like Euromontana. It's very strongly islands, specific areas with specific character. It is true that, for example, for rural areas, certain costs are higher than for urban areas. There are certain these areas very often are lagging behind. It's not just that they are lobbying to get more money, but that they have a legitimate concern that they actually need more funding. And there is a big question mark. Do we keep as a separate policy? That's, as Alexandra mentioned, maybe the rural and agriculture and all that should contain, let's say, continue to be a separate policy and a separate fund and a separate, let's say, silo? Or is it something that can be horizontal across all policies, where there is a risk, of course, with we can say, okay, we have educational policy with a rural angle. You have transportation policy with a rural angle. We have health policy with a rural angle. But how to make sure that all these separate policies take into account rural? So this is the horizontal treatment. This is still a big dilemma. So the one option would be to have the ring fencing. A lot of stakeholders are saying, at least for rural areas, we have to have either a ring fencing, which is, let's say, hard limit. So you absolutely have to allocate, I don't know, 10%. 10% has been mentioned for rural, or a spending target, which is slightly less. Okay, we are not saying how much you have to allocate up front, but you have to end up at the end of your period by spending at least 10% for rural areas. So the dilemma is, of course, if you introduce such an instrument, you have a kind of one-size-fits-all solution, which is not always working well. The question is, if you say something has to go to rural areas, how do you define rural? And there are a lot of definitions, and there are a lot of criteria to discuss, and that has not been completely finalized yet. And there's, of course, the issue of who is monitoring where the money is going, and how you enforce this if it's not going there. And then finally, you have the issue of different ministries, different administrative structures. If you have a separate ministry, let's say for rural or for mountainous or for islands area, you're dealing with people who are administrators, who are responsible for that area, but they're not looking at the whole picture. On the other hand, you have people who are looking at the whole picture, but they have to be rural proofers. They have to look from the rural point of view. That sometimes is not very easy. So the choice of the option, the separate policy or horizontal and so on, will also depend on the administrative organization of a given member state. So that can even create even more imbalances and even more differences. Finally, the area-based tools. You have all heard about LEADER, and I have heard from a high-level EU official that LEADER is a European success story, and it wasn't a DG Agri person, by the way. So everybody was expecting that now it is proven its efficiency. There will be more space given to it. However, it is only mentioned that it is mandatory in areas with specific disadvantages. Nobody knows how they would be defined, and there is no ring fencing. So there's actually, like, LEADER has less prominence than it has had until now. There's a feeling that this is an underutilized potential. There are certain inconsistencies in provisions, like I think what Alexandra mentioned, that there are those different in the regulation on the cap, there are different provisions on LEADER than in the regulation on the other funds on CLLD, and this has to be, of course, clarified. To me, I have thought of calling it a mainstreaming failure, but not in the sense of we were calling about LEADER mainstreaming back in the early 2000s. No, I don't mean that. I mean, LEADER has not become a household word. It has not become a well-known tool to everybody in Europe, so that everybody knows that, of course, some EU funding has to go to LEADER. It is still something that people who are dealing with it, people who are specialists who are dealing with rural development, they have to continue to explain and defend and explain and defend again every time with a new funding period, and with the officials when new people come to ministries. Nobody understands LEADER, so it hasn't been mainstreamed in that sense. We have all failed to make it become more popular and more recognized. So, of course, there are a lot of ELARD is one strong voice to say mandatory ring fencing for LEADER or CLLD, with a lot of high percentages coming. But I hope that Serafin will get back to that. But it's not just ring fencing. There can be other ways. There can be a higher EU co-financing rate if a member state uses LEADER or CLLD. There can be guidance recommendations. There can be capacity building for managing authorities, as in the case of the fisheries managing authorities, for example. There are other ways to make this happen, but it has not been safeguarded in the system. So it's not just that there is no ring fencing. There are options. Stakeholders would like to see how it will be safeguarded one way or another. And then the final thoughts for me, some general ideas, is I think that this is because there is such a very, very strong negative reaction to the Commission's proposals, we are finally getting to the discussion why the EU should be funding anything at all. And if it should be funding, what it should be funding, what we are trying to achieve with the EU funding. This is the real and the really interesting discussion. And I think from the local development perspective, especially. Second thing that has come into the open with that discussion is the recognition of differences in member state capacity. I think for many years there has been some kind of, let's say, political correctness, in the sense that the Commission was tried to avoid criticizing certain member states, saying you are not really managing your funding well, you're not able to cooperate with your stakeholders properly. Now I think that at least the local stakeholders are saying very much, we would like the Commission to enforce certain things on member states, because we know that some member states are not doing it correctly. So this has come into the open. And finally, I think it's also interesting that in that debate, at least rural areas, but also I think the territorial aspect, stakeholders are not coming with a hat in their hand saying we want more money because we are poor. They are actually saying we want more money because this is an investment into Europe's future, because we have something to offer. And this is I think, an interesting change that I also noted in the debate that we're following. Okay, so this is it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ursula. I think a lot of reactions have already, let's say, taken place also in the chat. From this, let's say, rural lens and a little bit more leader lens, of course, there are so many questions then popping up. And if I cannot even imagine that there will be one or several member states in the next period who will not have local action groups because they don't need to have them. It will be, let's say, really sad for those who have worked with LEADER for all those times. But we have to face, let's say, the reality. We have to discuss things, and there have been two reports of the European Court of Auditors also on LEADER. So and we know that not everything was perfect. But we will now come back, before we have some minutes of discussion, to Serafin, who still has, let's say, a few ideas which are not so rurally focused, because I think we have to be very careful when we talk about local development, not to see everything only, let's say, through the rural lens, and yes, to see a little bit in which direction we will go. Serafin, back to you.
Thank
Please
you.
keep it short.
Very well. I will briefly, because of the time, and the whole point of me coming back is to introduce a few things for provocation. I'm going to start with where Ursula left, with a bit more details, and then making some provocation. In the previous meeting, I already made some suggestions, which I remember some skepticism about that, some of them, but they're at play, and I have a certain track record that some things I've been saying over several programming periods magically appearing in the regulations once finally approved. So I will continue today for provocation as well, providing a few additional ideas that are being at play at the moment in discussions. But before I do, just to put a few extra details on local development and leadership in smart villages. Well, we don't know, there's no earmarking, it's quite clearly not the case. For reference, at the moment, in rural areas, it is invested 70 billion of euros, 24 billion in CAP, and that's 80% of the CAP, according to the calculations of DG Agri in the Long-Term Vision Rural Areas Update Report 2024. And then I'm very pleased to have an author of that study here in attendance. Cohesion policy spends in rural areas about 45%. That doesn't mean in rural development, I mean in rural areas, but anyway, it's a lot of money. That compares with only 18 billion spent in urban development earmark, the famous Sustainable Rural Development 8% of European Regional Development Fund. Okay, so if we go back to the 10% of rural that's been generally highlighted in the letter of von der Leyen and the accompanying unsigned document that were attached to it, 10% amounts to 86 billion of euros. Well, that's exactly the same amount, 1 billion less, than the amount of the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development. So my suggestion is, don't see this as 8% for rural development, 10% for rural development, 10% for doing things that EFRD used to do. And as we know, EFRD, 95% of EFRD is nothing to do, well, it's nothing. It's not about rural development beyond agriculture. It's to support agriculture. So I think I will be cautious about taking. Yeah, I know the colleagues on the moving around I see some faces, but I'm doing here for some provocation. So that's the show I'm doing today. Gladly so. So as I say, I think it could be a mirage. So be careful with putting too much hopes on this 10%, because there are other voices well organized that will say, well, this 10% should go to farm support activities not covered in Pillar 1, direct support, the one that is already earmarked. Then smart villages, and I hope that will be corrected in the negotiations, has only marginally mentioned, much less than in the current period, which was it was the first time it was mentioned. Result indicator 40 has been removed. I think another thing that I hope that will be in the negotiations put back again is the fundamental tasks that LACs should have, because there's no reason why this shouldn't be there. One of the reasons why the text is so short, partly is because, as in the previous period, one of the key criteria is word count. So I think I was being of the radical editing in the final stage of drafting, and I think there should be a space for negotiators to agree, both council and MEPs, that the minimum roles of lags should be covered. Then another thing that is, I think, is going the positives. Finance not into cost will be for applicable to most of leader activities, 400,000 euros. I mean, I think the average is 3 million across Europe. So, there will be a significant activities that can be done by finance not to cost that, if done properly, can simplify enormously the life of local action groups and address a lot of the concerns of the 2008 and the famous 2022 European Court of Auditors report on leader, which I think we should be talking more rather than about talking about that perhaps we do. So now come with some suggestions. Well, the other thing I should say is very important. This is just screenshots of everything you're going to see on territorial in the regulations. As you can see, if you have been working in spatial policies, territorial evaluation, I'm part in several Horizon projects on looking at granular detail at square meter level, or the classification, urban-rural classifications, the fact that only very generally territory is defined in the regulations, where basically the National Regional Partnership Plan are territorial policies, is quite disappointing. And that's why it's the thing where we are against. I mean, there's very little definitions of anything. There's no definition of functional area, no definition of urban or rural. The only thing is what you see here. In leader, they just say, okay, there's a menu. Well, if you do leader, you should report it here. And that is something that I hope, and I think there's big scope for that to be improved. And then the problem as well of mixing brain drain with northern sparsely populated areas, demographically changed areas within the European Regional Development Fund has a definition what for the first time what is a demographically declaring area. As you know, I was very key after on that effort. Of course, that's disappear. That's not going to help because if you create a smorgasbord of concepts put together, the likely thing is that people will not read them correctly, and therefore, as Ursula mentioned, fostering spatial inequalities, even sometimes by accident. So another thing that I will be, because we're talking about rural, let's also forget that urban doesn't have earmark, not in the current or revised or original proposal of the Commission. I should recall, colleagues, that there is a 20 billion euros in the MFF, the Euro budget proposal, that is for cities, social innovation, and other things. Well, nobody's being able to explain to me what these 20 billion euros are for, but there's a bit more than what is being currently spent by the European Regional Development Fund Sustainable Development. Interestingly enough, the European Agenda for Cities that was presented yesterday, I think today is the first time, LDnet leading the way of having the first time this is considered in a public meeting. It talks about capacity building, optimizing structures. Some of you are being involved in that over the years, the European Urban Initiative and predecessors, European Development Network, but no mention on the money. And that's a bit concerning. And that's something that I think we should be looking at. So another thing, and that's to finish, just to throw ideas, even if they might not be appreciated, I think we should, and I think some of us will be trying to spell out further in the regulation what's right to stay, because very little is there, and it's a key concept to support local development. To try to go back to the demographic declining area definition that exists in the 9th cohesion report. It's not the definition I advocated or drafted, but the one created by the Regio, and I think it's a good scope for that definition that covers most member states in a granular way to be put at least in the performance framework. There should be a better link between structural reform and national single plans. This is not going to, or national regional partnership plans. This is not going to weigh, and we need to think about that. We are working in some forms of works for the performance framework. There should be a mandatory catalog per essential services that cohesion policy or the national regional partnership plan should mention. Why I say this? Because now there's no definition of what is an eligible cost or non-eligible cost. It has a problematic issue as regards to implementing funds, because that means that suddenly you can invest in many more things, but also you can actually do measures to actually support support the right to stay, not necessarily providing the service, but creating the conditions for the service. And then there's also the performance framework, which is here to stay. There's a lot of data that is already available at European level in a very territorial sense, clarifying what is rural, what is urban, the gender dimension, and that's insufficiently exploited. I just been in a conference today where we organized, but I started looking at that. And then just to finish and just to make sure that people end up putting more faces to my presentation. Well, first, absolutely integrating the territorial classification of the EU, the GORBA classification, which decides what is a city, what it is a urban, rural areas. It is the world standard, and we have with the founder of that classification in the conference today. This is part of the EU law, and it's unthinkable that this is not mentioned there. And that should also be the reporting of the National Regional Partnership Plan should be clarifying, no matter if there's earmark or not, whether it's being invested in urban, rural, but not in a general sense as the regulation says that, but actually using the GORBA classification, so we know where the public money is properly being spent. Then, as I say, there should be separate provisions for in the regulations for sparsely populated areas, for demographically killing areas, for urban areas, and not this smorgasbord of article that we got at the moment that will only create lack of accountability and not actually encourage sensitive implementation of territorial implementation of funds. Then, to add to the further provocation, something that I'm sure none of you will agree, but well, nevertheless, still considering. Rather than sticking to the mirage of the 10% for rural, why don't we ask for 10% in the National Regional Partnership Plan for local development, urban and rural, letting them member states and their stakeholders to fight it out domestically? Because if you got a 10%, it's essentially the same amount euro up, euro down that we are spending now in urban development and local development across cohesion policy and rural development. If you got this 10% there and then allow member states to then discuss internally what should be more for urban, more rural, you are especially targeting a significant part of the budget at sub-regional level without actually getting the money disappearing, as I fear will happen with this 10% on rural, that it is very likely that what you think is going to go for rural development beyond agriculture will end up being supporting agriculture. And then there's a couple of things that I want to get in here, but we're looking to some legal text to protect the competences of local and regional authorities. The Commission revised proposal is a positive step. I know our German colleagues have been talking a lot about that because of the serious constitutional concerns of the National Regional Partnership Plans as originally proposed. But I think there is additional things to be done on legal fine-tuning. So a region, if it feels, or a local authority feels threatened their powers by centralization, can actually argue the regulation as the regulation is primary EU law. Also, I will look into suggest to creatively look at the fact that NUTS 3 level, like provinces, districts, departments, is now the basis of allocation of EU funds for the National Regional Partnership Plans. This is just an accountant technique. Nothing has not a real political intention, but now it's there. And I think it's a good way to start suggesting, okay, there should be NUTS 3 level based chapters or axes in the programs, because now NUTS 3 is better than NUTS 2 to territorially space and target funds. So let's make the best of that in the discussions. And then, very important, because a lot of the focus will be, and that's my last point, a lot of the focus will be on the big regulation, the cap regulation, which articles should be there, should be back, and so on. A lot of the things will be resolved, by the way, not in the regulations, but in the COCOF note or the implementation guidance that the Commission, at the request of member states, will develop. But most important document, if you ask me, is not the regulations, is the performance framework. Because a lot of the things that are not defined in the main regulations are defined in the performance framework. That is the words tell you what it means housing. It means housing only in certain conditions. And that will basically be a big driver about how the member states will implement it. So there is a big scope. We have found we have a realm of data and indicators on quality of service, of access, local access to service, affordability, patient satisfaction, local resident satisfaction that already exists at the European level and has not been incorporated to the performance framework, partly because of the rush to conclude the proposal. And we'll be talking with institutions in the coming weeks based on the evidence we have gathered to try to at least have a constructive discussion so as to ensure that if the partnership plans, national partnership, regional partnership plans are here to stay, that they are as territorially sensitive as possible. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Serafin. Yes, I think we would probably need a whole new webinar just for the discussion on these ideas and on these provocative ideas. And we have to finish in 4 minutes, unfortunately. I'm glad that Alexandra managed to reply in the chat to some questions that were addressed to her. I think that's really nice. I can see that when I listened to Serafin, I noted that let's say the devil is really in the detail, in the very complex detail, while Ursula, of course, in the way that she, let's say, moderates the discussions that she had in the rural pact was much clearer, and we all like that, of course. It's very clear, but I'm a little bit afraid it will be a little bit more complicated like that. Honestly, as a moderator, I don't know what to do now, because if I would now ask anyone to react in 2 minutes will be really difficult. So my idea would be maybe just only, you are always invited, of course, to still write your comments in the chat, and we can take them up for our summary. But I would maybe just give back the floor to Peter, who's, let's say, our chair, and in any case, he was supposed to close this meeting, and maybe Peter has some very few, let's say, bullet points.
Pedro, just a small point. I think we have specifically asked Martina to contribute very quickly to the discussion. I don't know if she wants to very quickly to jump in as just because she was asked.
Okay, I had forgotten about that. I'm
good
sorry.
idea.
Yeah.
And let's also ask the audience to bear with us to go over by up to 5 minutes.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, then we have 5 minutes plus, and we'll maybe start with Martina if she is ready.
Yes, thanks a lot. Thanks for being part of this interesting discussions. I think that we'll have time to dig into the details and in the next month. But we have already started that. I'm working in an advisory center supported by an Italian region, Friuli Venezia Giulia region, working with the regional and local entities for territorial development. And during this year, we have organized every month an in-present meeting on EU relevant topics, targeting regional and local officers. And in September, we organized a seminar on the new MFF with a representative of DG Regio, Nicola De Michelis, Director for Inclusive Growth, Territorial and Urban Development and Northern Europe from DG Regio. And there is a point that very briefly I would like to make, because he said something. He said, cohesion policy is today more fragile, and actually I took note of this statement coming from DG Regio. I think it's very relevant, and I started to think exactly why it's more fragile. What makes it more fragile? Of course, all the things that you said are very relevant, but in my view, of course, there are concerns on centralization of power, loss of power by region, but to me, this is not the main issue, because we have very good examples. For example, if I think of Italy, even before, we put in place a national-driven partnership, basically voluntary model, the inner area strategy, which is based exactly on what this national regional partnership should be. But the point is that that policy was built with a place-based approach in mind, and through commitment to the valorization of local knowledge, institutional capacity and try to avoid vested interest capturing the local resources, which are elements of the place-based approach by Fabrizio Barca that are, in my view, very, very, very relevant. And another point that I think it's relevant from the place-based approach is the fact that local communities are seen as co-designers and co-implementers, not simply as beneficiaries or instrumental to delivery, as it looks like in this proposal. And in fact, to me, so my main concern actually, what I see is the withdrawal of a leading role from the European Commission, the European level, in promoting common strategic frameworks for territorial change. And I refer here not only to local and urban strategies, CLLD, sustainable urban development strategies, but also smart specialization strategies. In the uneven panorama of institutional capacity that Ursula has very well pointed out, this is to me a real concern. What we are accepting here basically is that who is doing well will probably continue to do so. Who is underperforming, this is not a concern for Europe. And I think this is a very sad message that this proposal offers to us. Of course, there will be ways to change it, but it's also true that we must take in mind that this is at least my personal opinion. We are very far from a place-based approach, and we must be very careful about that. This is all.
Thank you, Martina. I think this was very, very valuable and adds very well on, let's say, from a regional perspective, and also from the specific, let's say, Italian perspective, and some developments that you had there to the other presentations. Yes, but now I think it's probably time for Peter to close. But before we close, or before Peter closes, I would like to say that there were two persons here in the LDnet board who were, let's say, the main drivers of the logistics of organizing this event. So it was Nesli, our new board member. Nesli, maybe you can wave to the participants so that they get to know you. Okay, so she was now in charge, let's say, of the technical side for this event. And then there was Harris Martinos, who, let's say, who's also, let's say, our long-time caretaker of the website and of many things. And he has launched, let's say, this whole registration process and so on. So thank you to both of you on behalf, I think, the whole board of this meeting, and especially from the Cohesion Policy Group. Yeah, thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Pedro. And I'd like to also thank Pedro and Ursula from the board, who have Pedro for coordinating and curating, as we now call it, this webinar, but and Ursula for also, along with Serafin, doing 3 in a row. And after a stunning performance by both Serafin and Ursula, it's going to be really difficult to imagine one of these without them. So thank you, both of you. I just wanted to make a few comments just to complete. Ursula mentioned that LEADER had failed to sort of hit the popular consciousness. But in fact, so has ERDF and ESF, and the only one that people really know about is the Common Agricultural Policy, whereas, and usually in a bad way. So the fact that we haven't, I remember in Merseyside, which was a program I was the desk officer for in the 1990s, people actually came to believe in the 2000s that being cultural capital is what had turned Merseyside around, or Liverpool around. But it wasn't that. It was 2 program periods of being Objective 1 which turned Merseyside around. But people gave all the credit to being cultural capital, which was a few events lasting 1 year, and not the sort of 2,000 euros of investment for the 93-99 program. So it's very difficult to get a brand to be really popular. I really noted the ring fencing discussion this time, and the Seraphin's suggestion of 10% for urban and rural. And I think that's something we could really latch onto, and quite how it could be, divided between urban and rural is anybody's guess. But I think the whole question of ring fencing and his mention that the performance targets are going to be more important than actually the way the program is written at national, regional, and local level is perhaps the crucial factor. But actually, I wanted to leave you with the word of the year because this is every year. Somehow in the UK anyway, we have a word of the year, and there is a word of the year which I think the Times produced, or the Oxford English Dictionary, or somebody produced. But we should have a local development word of the year, and Seraphin, of course, has coined it. It is smorgasbord. So I give you smorgasbord, and thank you all very much for attending. Thank you again to Pedro for curating, Nesli and Harris for communicating, Ursula and all the other speakers, Alexandra, Martina, Seraphin for participating. And thank you all, and good omens for 2026, where we hope to get ring fencing in a smorgasbord environment. Thank you.